The problem in education, the indoctrination in education is not a red or blue state. If you think, oh, it's not happening in my county or in my state, I promise you it is.
My name is Jared Julia, and welcome to The Cave. Welcome to our very first installment of The Cave. I started this podcast because I realize that there's a lot of people out there that are just wondering what the heck is going on with our school system, and they also want to find a way to push back against this woke indoctrination, this woke madness. And so instead of just sitting there and getting more and more frustrated, I wanted to give people hope, but also usable information so that they can get organized and push back against this nonsense. So that's why I've invited a series of guests that are going to appear on this podcast over the next few months. And what their specialty is, what their area of expertise is teaching parents how to push back against what's going on in our school system right now, which makes our very first guest a perfect guest. Alvin Lui is the president of Courage is a Habit, and their website is chock full of strategies and tools for parents to use when effectively pushing back against this woke. Alvin, thank you so much for joining us. I've got to ask you how you came up with the title for Courage is a Habit.
You know, I love telling this story because I think it's something everybody can relate to it. So when I got to Indiana after moving my family from California, I really felt that I didn't have to fight anymore. You're in a red state. I didn't understand at the time that the same seeds that ruined my old home in California was already in every single education system across all 50 states. So I started to talk to parents and giving them a warning to kind of say, hey, look, I'm from the future. I see where this is going. All this white privilege and inclusion and equity. I've seen all this. So this is where they're taking you. It's not just about teaching real history. It's not just about it's about inclusion and equity. So I started speaking to groups of parents. And one day I was about to get up for my piece there. And it kind of dawned on me. I was looking at all these people, these successful people, great people. I love Indiana. Indiana's wonderful. And it was ad lib. I got up and I said, don't you find it kind of strange that all you wonderful, successful, accomplished people are coming to a Thursday night or a Saturday night listening to a stranger, literal stranger from another state, telling you how to protect your children? Because if your children or your grandchildren were in a burning building, literally nobody would stop you from running into that building. Your life, nobody could. You would run that building as long as you can save that your child or your grandchild's life. You will do it without second thought, and you wouldn't have to stop and ask anybody. Nobody could stop you. So, and everybody knows how to protect their children. You may not know a lot when you bring that first baby home, right? Especially that first baby. You might not know a lot, but you know how to protect your child. It's instinctual. It's your God-given, your God-given duty. So what makes this time so special that someone can point a finger at your face, call you a bigot, call you a transphobe, call you a racist, and then you back down and let them have your kids at school, a government tax-paying entity, no less. So I said, well, what makes this time so special is because they've taught all of you to make fear a habit.
Right.
Over time, you said, oh, I shouldn't say that because that might make me a racist. Oh, I better take that training at work. Oh, I better say this during a meeting. You didn't believe any of it. Right. Nobody's a racist. Nobody's a bigot. None of you people are like this. Nobody's like this. But they made you feel this way. And then you just became more and more silent. And you told yourself, when it comes from my family, when it's important, I will speak up then. Not understanding that they've trained you to make fear a habit. So now here you are.
Right.
Now here you are. I said, but the good news I'm going to give you tonight is that courage is also a habit. Every time you want to say something and you know you don't want to post it on Facebook, you don't want to post it on X, you don't want to post it on your local community board, and you say it anyway, and you get the, oh, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you just want to kill kids, oh, you just white privilege.
Yeah.
And you take that sting and then you go, okay. And then the next time you do it again and again. And I cannot tell each and every one of you when it's going to happen. For you, it might be 10, for you, it might be 7, for you, it might be 25. But there's going to come a time where courage becomes a habit and you
Right.
won't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
But everybody's got to go through that first 5 or 6 times
Yeah.
because it's not a habit.
Right.
So anyway,
Yeah.
that was in
And
Indiana.
you've got to do it and realize you're going to live through it, or realize that your kid's not going to automatically fail the class, or, if you speak up or anything like that. Once you break through, you realize that it's that
And
it's not
so
as
when
big a
we,
deal.
so that's so anyway, that was the background. Then when I went to go create courage as a habit, then that when we were thinking about a name, that's what I thought about, that it's not what we're doing. While it's obviously courage as a habit is focused on creating tools and strategies for the average parent and legislators about the indoctrinations in K through 12, both public and private. We're really not fighting indoctrination in school. What we're doing is we're fighting fear in parents.
Right.
That's really what it is. And in Americans in general, we are in the business of reversing people's fears and their unfounded fears and the fears that's been put on them psychologically by communists and Marxists. If we can reverse that, then honestly, most of these organizations doesn't exist because every American will know what to do. They will not vote for open borders. They won't vote for their Second Amendment away. They certainly won't let people indoctrinate their kids sexually and politically. Right. So it's that they've made fear a habit and they don't even know it. And so that's what courage is. Courage is a habit is really about reminding people that the power's in your hands, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit, the language contamination and the weaponizing kindness, all these psychological gambits that these people are using on good-hearted people is why we are where we are.
Yeah. And, my journey as a parent, I tried to fight it myself and I was able to make some headway. But it seems like parents that get organized, they can, or joining an organization like yours, or just looking at your website and all of your and all of the materials on there, it makes it so much easier to fight because they're not reinventing the wheel of this battle.
Well, we try to give parents tools. We're trying to give parents tools to work around the gaslighting and the lies and those type of things. And because our opponents have a lot of tools. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of tools. They have a lot of institutional power. They have a lot of systemic power. So when parents try to go in without some of these tools and understanding how they are psychologically being manipulated, it makes a steep hill a heck of a lot steeper.
Yeah, and when you start speaking up, you realize how many people are on your side. It is amazing how few people literally believe a lot of these woke concepts. How many people just don't say anything because they don't want to be canceled, they don't want to be ostracized, and that appears, or that looks like they buy in, and they really don't. And when someone can just speak up, it's amazing how many other parents just instantly you realize, oh my gosh, we're not just a majority, we're like a super majority. And we're not just made up of people on the right, it's people on the left, it's people in the middle. It's amazing.
It is. Yeah. That's what I heard a saying that I thought was really true. The most important person that speaks up is not the first one, it's the second one.
Yep.
It's the second one because the gap between the first person and the second person can be a long gap. Because the first person usually they have that personality to always stand up and away from the crowd. I'm not saying the first person to stand up is easy. It's never easy. But they certainly do have a personality and an inclination to not care so much about what people think. It's that second and third person that's tough.
Right.
That second person stands up, then the gap between the second and third and the second and fourth is a lot shorter.
Right. Now backing up, how did we get here? Because my daughter graduated from high school about 4 years before my son. She didn't know anyone who identified as anything. but
That's
my
right.
son has people that identify as a different gender, but they also identify as some kind of a furry or some kind of an
Yeah.
animal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it seems like a lot has happened in a relatively short period of time. But how did this happen? How did this start?
Well, I think when you're talking about the government education, we can go back 60 years. But for the
Mm,
purposes of this kind of conversation, it's academic, but it's not very useful to go back that far because then people get lost in the minutia. So what I like to start when people ask this question, I like to go back about 10 to 12 years because
okay.
that's relevant. It's certain very, very relevant to everybody today. So the way this started, at least for the purposes of everybody involved today, or would care to be involved today, is about 2010, 2011, a program called social emotional learning came in. And again, without getting into too many rabbit holes, the Obama administration changed the way education was measured.
Mm,
Before education, yes, even government education, okay, was measured on academics, your proficiency in academics. The Obama administration changed that by saying we now have to measure their emotional and mental competencies.
mm,
And the Trojan horse was mental health. And the Trojan horse was a child cannot learn if they don't have good mental health. Yeah, that sounds great.
yeah,
And so then, of course, the schools go, I have no idea how would we possibly measure mental health competencies, emotional competencies. How would we measure that? We can measure English and we can measure math, we can measure reading. We have, standards for that. And so an organization called CASEL, 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 CASEL came in and said, we have a program called social emotional learning. And if you just do this a little bit, we'll survey the kids and then we'll see how they're doing emotionally, mentally, and then we'll give you a report. And if you're doing great, you meet this criteria, and you get funding from the government, and this is part of the funding. It's all packaged for you. What people didn't know at the time, except for the people pushing it, was the social emotional learning is a delivery system for critical race theory, and it was always meant to slowly and then not so slowly move out academics and brainwash children to be anti-America, anti-Constitution. And so that obviously splinters social emotional learning is think of social emotional learning as an IV.
mm,
As an IV you would put in the arm of the hospital. Once you get that IV in there, they can put whatever they want through the IV, through the IV
right,
tube.
yeah,
So queer theory, critical race theory, anti-white, anti-constitution, climate change.
right,
Police are killing black people for fun. And now you see academics are completely in the toilet,
right.
completely dead.
Because before
But
2011, they were going down
yeah,
anyways. But then
anyway,
this just kind of sped it up.
this that's right. And so now you've got children whose mental health, the actual mental health, not their Trojan horse mental
Right.
health, worse than ever.
Yeah.
Academics, 100% worse than ever. And the trick here is that they blame COVID.
Mm,
You'll see that a lot. Oh, the school closure caused the learning loss.
mm,
COVID did not help. COVID didn't help,
right.
but that's not the reason. And people in our education space have to stop giving them that out, because when you say it's because of COVID closures, you're actually giving them an out because you're not hitting what the core issue is. And the core issue is that social emotional learning, or SEL, as we call it, has fundamentally and systemically changed the school culture.
Mm,
Let me give you an example
mhm,
for those of you people listening, to those listening, that will help you understand how pervasive social emotional learning is. So here is the example. Let's say that I, Alvin Lui, wanted to teach a class on Buddhism,
mhm,
fifth period, fourth period,
right.
freshman, sophomore, high school, maybe middle school, So pretend for a moment that I was able to get that passed and I was able to teach a class on Buddhism. So some kids take it, some kids don't. It's not a requirement. Some kids might come in and say, it's kind of weird. I don't like any of it. Some kids might go, I can take some of it. But it's a class teaching you the facts about Buddhism. Who is Buddha, how long he lived, when he lived, what he believed in, the philosophy, kind of ABCs of Buddhism.
Right.
So, okay, it's one period. That's it. But imagine if instead of me teaching a class on Buddhism, imagine if I changed your school, your daughter's school, your son's school, into a Buddhist temple. Now, when someone walks into a Buddhist temple, they're not learning about Buddhism. They're not learning about who Buddha is. What they're learning is how to live and practice like a Buddhist, a practicing Buddhist. So that means that every decision they make in life is through the lens of a practicing Buddhist. So every success, every failure, who they marry, who their friends are, where they buy the house, how they decorate their house.
Right.
Everything that happens in their life, they will view it through the lens of a practicing Buddhist. How should I take this failure? How should I take this success? Okay, so replace everything I just said on Buddha and Buddhism and replace it with critical race theory, critical race theorist, or a transgender cultist. That is what K through 12 is today, and that's what social emotional learning did to the entire culture. It's not just a curriculum, it's the entire culture. The surveys, the data is collecting on children. It's all meant to be manipulated to come back and say, we need more equity, we need more representation.
Right.
Children are not doing well mentally. They don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. They don't feel belonging. We need more inclusion. We need more diversity. When you step into a K through 12 today, in government K through 12, you are stepping into a temple. They are teaching them how to live and behave like a practicing critical race theorist or a transgender cultist. That's what social emotional learning has done to K through 12. That's how we got here.
So very shocking that that so many of these homeschooling organizations are just growing exponentially, and
That's right.
parents in droves. Because growing up in the 80s, I went to high school in the early 80s and college in the late 80s. Homeschooling was, a few weird people did it. Some, I guess the Amish did it or whatever. And, that was about it. Now, most of my neighbors homeschool their children. So it's a much more significant thing. And also the internet makes it easier because there's a lot of curriculums online that moms and dads can share and can take from others. But if that really isn't an option for you to homeschool your child, what do you do? Because you just painted a pretty disturbing picture just now. Okay, and I can't take my kid out of the local school. What do I do?
Okay. And so this is where courage is a habit comes in, because we believe that, especially on the conservative side, there's a very bad habit on the conservative side where they only create outrage with no outlet. They bring you these huge problems. And then at the end, they go, we have a country to save. This is our time. It's like, I work in HR. I'm an engineer. I'm a web designer. What do you want me to do about that? I'm a stay-at-home mom or whatever. What do you want me to do about that? So courage is a habit. We believe that if you create outrage without an outlet, you end up creating hopelessness inadvertently. And that's the last thing we want to do. We don't want to create hopelessness, because hopelessness leads people to apathy, inaction. And that's the last thing we need. And that's one of the reasons why we got here, is because of apathy and inaction. So there's a few things as a parent that, if you're just hearing about this, if you're listening to this podcast and you're going, oh my God, I don't want to lay this on you without giving you tools and hope and something to stay on offense. Okay. So here's three things. And I will actually give you the link so that way in your show notes, wherever it shows up, you'll have the links.
Okay, perfect.
So the first thing is, you have to see for yourself what's in your schools. So I'm going to give you something called the 10 questions that every parent should ask. We have 2 volumes. I'll give my buddy here both volumes. And you can use, you're not going to ask all 20 questions at the time. It's 2 volumes, 10 questions each. We teach you how to ask these questions. We teach you what happens when they try to gaslight you or run you around. So it's a short read.
Mhm.
Every it's made for the average parent that don't have 2 hours to read it.
Right. Okay.
So we tell you what to do. Then here's the two actionable things that I want to give you. First of all, I want every parent to opt their kids out of the surveys. We have an opt-out form for you. Parents all across the countries have used it with great success. Uh, and sometimes schools will try to give you a runaround. We talk a little bit about that as well.
Mhm.
But you have to opt your children out of the surveys because the surveys are the blunt line to social emotional learning. They take this, and we explain this in the tool that I'm gonna give you guys.
Right.
Um, they take the tool, or they take the survey, and they manipulate the data through something called an equity lens. So it's always a self-fulfilling prophecy. Every time they give you a survey to your child, which they shouldn't be surveying minors.
Mhm.
First of all, it's a
Right.
government tax-paying entity. And I hope every parent can agree to that. They will take the data and they'll say, we need more social emotional learning, more representation, more inclusive policies. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So parents need to get their kids out of that.
Right.
We would recommend that you get 4 or 5 other families
Mhm.
and you all turn in the opt-out form for each child, one per child. It's it's easier when you have other families to do it. It's harder for them to give you a gaslighting. So we recommend, not, the more the better, but I would say 3 or 4 families turn in the opt-out form. That's the first one. The second one is we will, again, is another opt-out form, but you really, really have to get your children away from school counselors.
Mhm.
And we can do a whole nother episode. I'd be happy to come back. We can talk about school
Right.
counselors. But school counselors are the biggest purveyors of the transgender cult.
Mhm.
So parents, please use this opt-out form. Say that my child is not to have any formal or informal meetings with any mental health professionals in school without my written approval or presence.
Right.
You cannot let these people get a hold of your child one-on-one and all the mental health, and they ask all these probing questions, and it's all to drive them towards that transgender ideology, because the school counselors, they're not the guidance counselors that you and I grew up with, or that
Right.
most people grew up with. They're no more. Again, that also changed in 2014 under Michelle Obama's program.
Mhm.
And they changed the school counselors to now the guidance counselors to school counselors. And now the schools are flooded with them. The Department of Education have poured hundreds and hundreds of millions to hire more school counselors. And the organization that's trained them, it's all about critical race theory. It's all about transgender ideology. So that's the second thing. So those are the things. Ask the questions, and you'll know exactly what we're saying is true.
Right.
And then opt them out of the surveys, and then opt them out of the meeting with counselors. And I think that's the basics that every parent can do. And I'll give you one more tool, and that's internal for your family. It's called stranger danger. And we
Mhm.
provide four, again, it's not certainly not exhaustive, but hopefully it inspires you to be creative. But we offer 4 strategies that every family can use, regardless of the age of your child. You can
Mhm.
modify it based on the age of your child and your family values,
Mhm.
but we give you 4 strategies, and it teaches you to teach your children to protect themselves.
I mean that sounds great. I just get concerned about things like last week, I guess the state of California
Mhm.
passed legislation really taking the parent out of the equation, especially when it talks about gender and things like that. It's
That's right.
it's just for me that's scary stuff, But in most other states, they can do
I,
exactly what you're
yeah.
saying.
Now, people will roll their eyes and say, oh, it's California. Of course. Certainly, California is ahead, but
Yeah.
California is a crystal ball. The problem in education, the indoctrination in education, is not a red or blue state.
Hmm.
I promise anybody listening, if you think, oh, it's not happening in my county or in my state,
Hmm.
I promise you it is. If you
Right.
send me your school, we will show you where the indoctrination is and how they're doing it.
Right.
Just because you don't live in California and California's ahead of it doesn't mean that it's not deep in your school already, because every single state, every district has social emotional learning, has critical race theory, has transgender ideology. School counselors come from the same well. They're trained to keep secrets. The only difference is that certain states don't have laws that help them along.
Hmm.
That's it.
Right.
But all the indoctrination indoctrination tentacles and the foundations and the programs and the way the teachers are trained, the way the school counselors are trained, it's all the same in all 50 states. Where you get into things like Maine, states like Maine, Illinois, Virginia, California, is that they are so corrupt in terms of further along. They have terrible governors. They have essentially governors that hate America,
Yeah.
that hate parental rights. So they have laws that makes it even harder for parents. But that doesn't, but don't confuse that with the schools not doing it or not having it. So I really want to make that very, very clear that when it comes to the education, indoctrination, red or blue state doesn't matter.
But we are seeing, I mean, we're seeing things getting a lot worse in California, but are there places where things might be getting better? Is there good news? I mean, are there any fronts where we're winning, you know?
Well, the good news is people like yourself, where you created that amazing graphic novel. You took upon yourself to get into the fight in your way.
Yeah.
Is the good news is there are people like exactly like you that in any other time would have been doing something else with your talents
Yeah,
and your efforts.
absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the good news because we've got very talented people, very driven people, very smart people like you getting into this fight using their talents in a way that otherwise we would never meet them. And so directors, writers, filmmakers, evolutionary biologists, former teachers, I can go on, and the people that I've worked with and had the honor to collaborate with or to learn from, I would have never in a million years met any of these people, but they were either doxxed or canceled, or their children were attacked or indoctrinated, and it woke them up. And so that is the good news, that they've turned some really, really smart, driven people against that. They've made enemies of some because the DI, we call it DI, we don't call it DEI, right?
Right.
Diversity, inclusion, equity. That diversity hire, that DI policy, the affirmative action, that philosophy, that inclusive, everybody's inclusive, we got to worry about everybody's feelings. They don't produce the best people, they produce the worst people.
Right.
You have to go to the bottom of the barrel. It's like they go, you don't qualify for this college or this job, but we're going to lower the standards because of your skin color or because you are a Black woman that identifies as non-binary. And so that person is not a good employee. They certainly are not innovators because they are mentally, either they're narcissistic or they're mentally ill, or they're only looking, how do we sue this company? Why aren't your bathrooms inclusive? Why doesn't your pronouns in the thing? Why doesn't your company policy say this? It's not inclusive enough. Their brains are always working towards dismantling.
Yeah.
So the good news is that our opponents have made enemies out of very smart, high-driven, high-accomplished people, because those people are the ones they have to kick out because they don't meet the DI.
Right.
They don't meet the I policy. They're not affirmative action. They're not diversity hires because they don't have a victimhood mentality. So now you have now flooded the country with a lot of very smart, driven, very pissed off people that are looking to take this country back. And I think we don't focus on that enough.
Right. Yeah. And in my graphic novel, I tried not to talk about woke as much as talking about the origins of woke, because
Right.
I have a buddy of mine. He's an electrician, loves hot dogs, or used to love hot dogs, and he had a gig at a food processing plant, and he saw this rotten meat in this metal wagon, and was like, oh, they must be ready to throw that away. But then they started boiling it and they started grinding it up, and he's like, oh, they're doing an awful lot to it before they throw it away. And he realized that was the fill of not only the hot dogs, but his favorite brand of hot dog, right? Oh. So he was so grossed out that he went home and threw away the half-used package in the garbage, and we're never buying hot dogs again, and blah, blah, blah. So, and I just feel like when you look at woke, it looks pretty harmless because they're insisting on a lot of stupid and silly things. Right. And a lot of times they're just they're saying, hey, look, just be nice or just be accepting. And I
Yeah.
think that's why they've made a lot of strides and they've made a
Right.
lot of progress.
Right.
And
Right.
yet, if you really go backwards and go to the origins, it's really
Yeah.
quite revolting,
Mhm.
where these ideas really come from.
So I'll leave you guys with one more thing that I think
Sure.
everybody can relate to, even if you're not focused on education. I will say,
Hmm.
whatever your issue is, you have to put some of your efforts and resources into education because I promise you, whatever your main issue is, they are
Hmm.
teaching children today to go against you.
Wow.
Name it. Name your issue, and I will
Mm.
show you how they're teaching your children to be against this, to be
Mm.
against you. So here's one concept that we teach parents a lot. And we always start with this because this is the core. You just said it. It sounds nice. It sounds harmless. What's the big deal? But when you really look into it, it's really insidious stuff. And your novel certainly highlights that very, very well. Um, it's a concept that we call language contamination.
Mm.
Here's the easiest way for everybody to remember it. Language contamination is that they use your vocabulary, but not your dictionary.
Mm.
They use your vocabulary, but not your dictionary. And here's an example. If I tell you that, oh, I'm teaching a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old empathy, you're probably going to go, okay, well, if he's 9 years old, empathy probably sounds like this. If they're six, they
Mm.
probably sound like this. If they're
Right.
18, it's going to be different. For most parents, empathy sounds something like this. I'm going to teach my child to put yourself in someone else's shoes. How would you feel if someone took your toy, hit you,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Mm.
Uh, that's probably empathy at a very young age. So when a parent goes to try to say, "Hey, I think you're teaching all this stuff," and they go, "Oh no, it's just to be kind.
Yeah.
It's just to be kind. It's just empathy. We're just teaching empathy. That's all." And then parents, not understanding language contamination, they use your vocabulary, not your dictionary. They go away going, "Oh, I teach my child that too at home."
Yeah.
What they don't know is, remember I said earlier, all education is based on critical race theory and queer theory. And when you walk into a school, you walk into a temple, they're teaching you how to behave and think like a
Right.
transgender cultist, right? Well, they teach your child empathy, especially girls. It's not the way you are going to teach them. Starting very young, they'll teach them people about marginalized people and people who are not seen and discriminated against. And at a very young age, again, they're weaponizing kids' empathy. And then when a girl's, 14, 15, 16, 17, when a man walks into her locker room or her
Mhm.
bathroom and she gets that visceral reaction that every woman she gets, she doesn't do that anymore. She goes, I have to have empathy for him. Because remember, she's been taught now since the kindergarten to put
Right.
herself in another person's shoes, a marginalized person's shoes. Now, when I give this example, parents are horrified. They're like, that's not what I mean it to be. I know that. That's not what you mean it to be. So now she has to go, I have to put myself in his shoes because he's marginalized. I have to worry about his human dignity. That's another word they use a lot. Human dignity, human rights. How would I like it if someone kicked me out of my locker room?
Mm. Yeah.
So you understand that language contamination is to use your vocabulary, but not your dictionary. And the one thing I want parents to take away from this conversation is every time a school counselor or teacher or administrator tell you, oh, we're just teaching this, that's all. Ask yourself, train your mind to ask yourself, through whose lens is that trait being taught?
Mm.
Whose lens? Through the lens of a critical race theorist. Uh, Responsible decision making means very different than through a lens of a mother and a father.
Right.
To a mother and father, responsible decision making is, you name it, right? Depending on the age of the child. Make your bed, do your homework, listen, you go to bed on time, do your chores,
Right.
don't drink and drive, depending on, right? Responsible decision making.
Right.
To a critical race theorist, responsible decision making means that if you're white, when you get older, you have to vote for reparations.
Right.
If you're white, you have to know that you have internal biases and you have to give up things for
Mm.
Black people because of slavery.
Right.
If you're Black or brown, your responsible decision making is to dismantle this country because it's oppressive.
Mm.
Same word, responsible
Right.
decision making. Who doesn't want responsible decision making? Who doesn't want empathy? So you have to ask yourself, through whose lens are those traits it's being taught. And if you can understand language contamination, the principle, and you understand you start to remember to ask yourself, through whose lens is it, and ask more questions and dig, you're going to find out that most of what they're teaching your children in schools is not something that you would want to be taught.
That's great. That's great advice. I really appreciate all the information you've been sharing with us. How do they get more information? How do they find Courage is a Habit?
So the best way, of course, is to go to our website, courageisahabit.org. We have a whole catalog of tools for parents and legislators. So if you have any legislators, any representatives that really, and we found that they don't know a lot about this either. They know less than parents, really. And so the tools are there for everybody. It's a huge catalog. It's courageisahabit.org, or you can follow us on our socials. All our socials is at Courage Habit. It says Courage Habit. But the website is courageisahabit.org, and we are a nonprofit. I'm always looking to try to expand our team. I don't like to expand our team too fast because I want to be able to hold on to our mission and the core of what we are. So sharing our tools is always great. Sharing conversations like this, and of course, any donations you throw our way so generously, it goes right back into our fight and goes right back into my small team.
Well, you do great work. And I'm so glad you joined us, and thanks so much.
Thank you. It was an honor. You're doing an amazing job, man. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Well, if you like what you saw, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to smack that bell.